I'm 83 years old now, and I've got maybe 6 months left to live. Lung cancer, stage 4. The doctors in Missoula gave me the diagnosis 3 weeks ago with that practiced sympathy they reserve for old men who've lived too long. But that's not why I'm finally telling this story. I'm telling it because I made a promise to someone who saved my life by teaching me what it means to be human. And because if I don't speak now, the greatest truth I've ever known dies with me. For 37 years, from March 1988 until November 2024, I protected something that wasn't supposed to exist. In the mountains of Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming, hidden beneath my cabin in an underground room I built with my own hands, lived a being that science says is impossible. His name was Samuel. At least that's the closest I could come to pronouncing the sounds he made. And he was a Bigfoot. A real living, breathing, thinking Bigfoot who taught me more about intelligence, consciousness, and love than any human ever did. My name is James Robert Sullivan. I'm a 2-tour Vietnam veteran, a widower, a father who failed his son, and for nearly 4 decades, the guardian of the most important secret in natural history. This is the story of how a man trained to kill learned to protect, how a hunter became a keeper, and why I finally decided to break my silence before it's too late for all of us. I'm sitting in a 1-bedroom apartment in Kalispell, Montana, surrounded by boxes I'll never unpack. Outside my window, the November snow falls soft and steady, covering the world in white silence. On the table in front of me sits a metal box containing 1,047 drawings, photographs I swore I'd never show anyone, and DNA samples that could rewrite everything we think we know about this planet. My hands shake as I open it, not from age alone, but from the weight of breaking a promise. Samuel asked me to keep him hidden, but in his final days he asked me something harder, to tell the world what he showed me before it's too late. This is that story. And God help me, every word of it is true. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me where you're watching this story from. March 8, 1988. Ronald Reagan was president. The Cold War was ending. MTV was playing George Michael and INXS on constant rotation, and I was living 40 miles from the nearest neighbor in the Flathead National Forest, Montana, trying to forget everything that mattered. I was 46 years old then, a man hollowed out by war and grief. My wife Sarah had died of breast cancer 3 years earlier, her final 6 months of brutal education and helplessness. We'd been married 18 years. After the funeral, I couldn't stay in our house in Great Falls anymore. Every corner held her ghost. The kitchen where she'd make coffee at dawn, the bedroom where I'd watched her waste away, the garden she'd planted that kept blooming without her like some cruel joke. So I did what broken men do. I ran. I bought 15 acres of forest land with money from Sarah's life insurance and our savings. The property came with a small cabin built in the 1960s, 2 rooms and an outhouse, no electricity, no phone line, just a hand pump for water and a wood stove for heat. It sat in a clearing surrounded by ponderosa pines and Douglas firs that stretched 200 feet toward the sky. The nearest road was 4 miles of dirt track that became impassable 6 months of the year. It was perfect for disappearing. I'd done 2 tours in Vietnam as a reconnaissance Marine, 68 and 70. Came back with a Bronze Star, a Purple Heart, and nightmares that Sarah used to hold me through until the screaming stopped. After she died, the nightmares came back worse. So I made peace with solitude, did occasional work as a hunting guide and tracker for the National Forest Service, spent my days chopping wood, my evenings drinking Old Crow whiskey, my nights remembering everything I wanted to forget. What I didn't know on that cold March morning in 1988, as I sat in my cabin listening to Paul Harvey on my battery-powered radio, was that in less than 3 weeks, I'd start tracking something that would give my life meaning again. Something impossible. It started on March 8th with footprints. I was checking my trap line about 2 miles north of the cabin, walking through fresh snow that had fallen overnight. That's when I saw them, tracks unlike anything in my 25 years of wilderness experience. They were enormous, easily 18 inches long and 7 inches wide at the ball of the foot. 5 distinct toes, visible toe pads, a deep impression suggesting something weighing 300 pounds or more. But what made my skin prickle wasn't the size, it was the stride. The prints showed a bipedal gait 52 inches between steps, with a depth pattern that indicated upright walking. Not a bear, which would show claw marks and a shuffling pattern. Not a moose or elk, which had hooved prints. These were something else entirely. I crouched down, took measurements with my folding rule, sketched what I saw in my field notebook. My training said document everything. My instincts said run. I followed those tracks for 3 weeks, through Montana, across the Idaho border, down into Wyoming. I told the Forest Service I was tracking a problem bear, filed vague reports that gave me authorization to move across jurisdictions. I camped in the snow, followed the trail through terrain that would kill most men half my age. The tracks appeared and disappeared, sometimes crossing frozen rivers, sometimes vanishing on rocky ground, but always reappearing. Whatever made them was heading south with purpose, and it was injured. I could see drag marks from the right foot, bloodstains every few miles, a trail that spoke of pain and determination. By March 28th, I'd tracked it into Yellowstone National Park. The trail led through a narrow ravine in the Absaroka Range, a place so remote the park rangers probably didn't know it existed. Snow was falling again, heavy and wet, limiting visibility to maybe 50 feet. I moved carefully, my .30-06 rifle ready, every sense on alert. That's when I heard it, a sound that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Low, resonant, almost a moan, but with a quality that raised every hair on my body. Not a growl, not quite human, but something that vibrated with intelligence and pain. The kind of sound that makes you understand, deep in your primal brain, that you're in the presence of something significant. I followed it around a bend in the ravine and froze. The creature was there, maybe 30 yards away, collapsed against a granite boulder. Even sitting, it was massive. I estimated 7.5 to 8 feet tall. Its body was covered in thick reddish-brown hair, darker along the spine and shoulders, lighter on the chest and face. The proportions were wrong for any known primate. Arms that reached past its knees, shoulders probably 4 feet across, a barrel chest that rose and fell with labored breathing. But it was the face that stopped me cold. Almost human, but not quite. Heavy brow ridge, broad flat nose, lips that were more pronounced than an ape, but less than a person. And the eyes, dark brown eyes that looked at me with unmistakable intelligence and something I'd seen too often in Vietnam, the knowledge that death was close. My rifle came up automatically. 46 years of life, 2 tours in hell, and all my training screamed unknown threat, neutralize. My finger found the trigger, began the slow squeeze. Then the creature did something impossible. It placed one massive hand on its own chest, gentle, deliberate, then pointed toward the sky. Then it pointed at me. Not aggressive, not threatening. A gesture so human it froze my finger on the trigger. It was asking, pleading. I looked down and saw why. Its right leg was a disaster. The lower bone, the tibia, was fractured, with white bone visible through torn skin and matted hair. The leg was swollen to twice its normal size, red with infection, bent at an angle that made my own legs ache in sympathy. Around the injury, I could see dried blood and the marks of a fall. This thing had probably dropped from a height, shattered its leg on impact. The creature made that sound again, softer this time. Not a threat, a question. And in that moment, standing in a snowy ravine in Wyoming with my finger on the trigger, I faced a choice that would define the next 37 years of my life. I could shoot, confirm my sanity, eliminate the unknown, maybe even become famous as the man who proved Bigfoot existed. The Patterson-Gimlin film from 1967 had been dismissed as a hoax by most scientists. My kill would be undeniable proof. Or I could help. I lowered the rifle. "Okay, big guy," I heard myself say, my voice sounding strange in the falling snow. "Let's see if you'll let me close enough to help." The creature watched me approach, its dark eyes tracking every movement. I'd treated wounded animals before, deer with broken legs, a wolf caught in a trap once, but I'd never felt observed like this. Not studied like prey, but evaluated. measured. This thing was deciding if I could be trusted. I stopped about 10 feet away and knelt down slowly, setting my rifle aside but keeping it within reach. The creature tensed, made a low sound, but didn't try to move. I could see it was too weak, too injured, maybe too hopeless to care anymore. "I'm going to help," I said, keeping my voice steady and low. "This is going to hurt like hell, but if we don't stabilize that leg, infection's going to kill you before anything else does." I unslung my pack and pulled out my first aid kit, rope, and 2 straight branches I'd been carrying for making traps. The creature watched as I approached, its breathing shallow and fast. When I reached out to touch the injured leg, it growled, a sound that rattled my chest, but didn't pull away. Working on that leg took 2 hours. I used snow to clean the wound, poured iodine over it while the creature made sounds that almost formed words, then used the branches and rope to create a splint. My hands were numb by the time I finished, my back screaming from kneeling in the snow. But the leg was stabilized. The creature would live. Maybe. When I was done, I sat back exhausted. The creature looked at its leg, then at me, then did that gesture again. Hand on chest, point to sky, point to me. Then it added something new. It touched its own chest with 1 finger, made a sound. Samuel. 2 syllables, repeated 3 times. Samuel. It was telling me its name, or close enough. My mouth couldn't form those exact sounds, but I understood. This wasn't an animal. This was a person. Different, yes, impossible, absolutely. But a person. "James," I said, touching my own chest. "My name is James." The creature, Samuel, nodded. 1 clear, deliberate nod of understanding. And in that moment, everything changed. Getting Samuel back to Montana was the hardest thing I've ever done, and I'd humped wounded Marines through rice paddies under machine gun fire. He couldn't walk. The leg wouldn't bear weight, and moving wrong would re-break it, or cause an embolism that would kill him. I couldn't call for help. Explaining Samuel to park rangers would mean capture, scientists, maybe dissection. So I improvised. I had a trailer back at my truck parked 4 miles away. I helped Samuel hobble that distance over 8 hours, supporting his weight with my shoulder, stopping every few hundred feet while he rested. He must have weighed 600 pounds, but he distributed his weight carefully, understanding that I was helping. The trailer was a covered utility trailer I'd bought to haul equipment. I loaded it with pine branches to make a bed, helped Samuel inside, and covered him completely. Then I began the 200-mile drive back to Montana, moving only at night, taking back roads, stopping every few hours to check on him and bring water. It took 6 nights. 6 nights of paranoia, of seeing police cars that weren't there, of wondering if I'd gone insane. But Samuel stayed quiet in the trailer, trusting me with a faith I didn't deserve. We reached my property on April 3, 1988, just before dawn. I backed the trailer into my small barn, checked to make sure no one had been around while I was gone, then helped Samuel into the cabin. He moved slowly, still weak, the leg healing but far from healed. I'd set up a space in the main room with blankets and a water barrel. Samuel collapsed onto the blankets and slept for 18 hours straight. I spent that time watching him, rifle across my lap, trying to understand what I'd done. I'd brought something impossible into my home. Something that could kill me without effort if it wanted. Something that might be the most important biological discovery in human history. Or something that was just a scared, injured person who needed help. When Samuel woke, he looked around the cabin with obvious curiosity. His eyes lingered on my books, my tools, the wood stove, the battery-powered radio on the shelf. He made soft sounds, pointed at things, looked at me with questions in his eyes. That's when I understood. He wanted to learn. About me, about my world, about how to communicate. So I started teaching him. Over the next 6 weeks, as spring turned Montana green, Samuel and I developed a language. It started simple. I'd point at objects and name them: water, food, fire. Samuel would listen, try to repeat the sounds, but his vocal anatomy couldn't quite manage human speech. So we switched to gestures. 1 knock on wood meant yes, 2 meant no. A hand over the heart meant gratitude or affection. A pointed finger meant question or attention. By the end of April, we had maybe 20 gestures. By June, over 50. By the end of that first year, we'd developed a communication system with 200 distinct gestures that covered everything from basic needs to complex ideas. But the real breakthrough came when I gave Samuel charcoal and smooth stones to draw on. His first drawings were crude, circles for food, wavy lines for water. But within weeks, they became sophisticated. He drew my cabin from multiple angles, showing spatial reasoning. He drew himself and me standing together, showing understanding of relationship. He drew the forest in amazing detail, trees rendered with individual leaves. Then he drew something that changed everything. It was July 1988. Samuel had been with me for 3 months, his leg healed enough to walk with a limp. I came back from town with supplies to find him hunched over a large flat rock, drawing furiously with a piece of charcoal. The image made my blood run cold. 5 figures, 2 large adults, 3 smaller ones, a family. Samuel had drawn them with careful detail, different heights, different poses. Then with quick, violent strokes, he'd drawn what looked like muzzle flashes, stick figures with guns, and the 3 small figures lying still. He looked up at me with tears in those dark eyes. Yes, tears, I saw them clearly, and pointed at himself, then at the 2 large figures, then made a gesture we'd established for gone or lost. I understood. Samuel had a family. They'd been killed, shot, murdered. He was a survivor, possibly the last of his kind, and he'd chosen to trust the same species that had destroyed everything he loved. I sat down beside him on the cabin floor, and Samuel leaned against me, his massive body shaking with grief that needed no translation. We sat like that until dark, 2 beings from different worlds, united by loss. That night I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. Samuel would never be found, never be captured, never be heard again. I would protect him, no matter what it cost me. And it cost me everything. By August 1988, word had started spreading in cryptozoology circles about unusual footprints in the Yellowstone region. I heard about it on my monthly supply run to Kalispell. A group called the North American Bigfoot Research Foundation was offering $100,000 for verifiable proof. They'd be in the area by September with thermal imaging equipment, night vision, and tracking dogs. I had 6 weeks to make Samuel disappear. I spent those weeks building an underground annex beneath my cabin. Using hand tools to avoid suspicious noise, I excavated a room 20 feet by 20 feet, 8 feet deep, accessed through a trapdoor hidden under my bed. I reinforced the walls with timber, installed ventilation pipes disguised as old plumbing, created a drainage system for waste. It took every ounce of strength I had and most of my savings for materials I bought across 3 different towns to avoid suspicion. Samuel watched me work, understanding somehow that I was building him a sanctuary. He helped, lifting beams I couldn't move, holding supports while I secured them. Working together, wordlessly, we created his hiding place. When the cryptozoologists arrived in September 1988, 3 vans full of equipment and investigators with cameras, Samuel was safely underground. They searched the area for 2 weeks. Twice they came to my cabin asking questions. I played the isolated veteran, offered coffee, told them I'd seen bears and elk but nothing unusual. They left disappointed. But they'd be back. They always came back. Over the next 37 years, the threats never stopped. In 1994, trophy hunters hired by a Texas billionaire got within 200 yards of my property with tranquilizer guns and cage trucks. I'd stood on my porch with my rifle and told them my land was posted. Trespassing meant shooting. They left but filed complaints. The sheriff came out, asked questions, found nothing wrong. In 2001, after September 11th, a classified military operation swept the region looking for terrorist activities. but I learned later they were really searching for biological anomalies that satellite imaging had detected. They used ground-penetrating radar, thermal cameras, the works. Samuel stayed underground for 3 weeks while I fed them a story about being a patriot who supported their mission. They scanned my property while Samuel held his breath in the cold underground room. His body temperature lowered somehow to avoid detection. In 2008, when consumer drones became common, I built a cooling system in the annex to mask Samuel's heat signature. In 2012, when smartphones put cameras in everyone's pocket, I posted private property, no trespassing signs every 50 feet around my land and installed motion sensors. Every new technology meant new threats. Every advance in tracking meant new precautions. My life became a constant vigil, and my isolation became absolute. I cut ties with my son Michael, who'd moved to Seattle after Sarah died. Told him I wanted to be alone, that the war had made me difficult. He stopped calling after a few years. I regret that more than I can say, but I couldn't risk him discovering Samuel. I turned down 2 women who might have been companions, both local widows who'd expressed interest. Invented a chronic illness to explain why I couldn't travel or host visitors. My entire existence orbited around one purpose, keeping Samuel safe. But Samuel gave me more than I lost. Those years between 1988 and 2015 were the richest of my life. Samuel wasn't just some creature I was hiding. He became my family, my teacher, my friend. He had preferences that constantly surprised me. He loved honey, wild honey especially, which he'd gesture for me to find in the forest. He'd sit for hours savoring it, making happy rumbling sounds. He hated the smell of gasoline, would retreat to the farthest corner of his room when I came back from town with the truck. And music. God, Samuel loved music. I'd bought a battery-powered cassette player in 1989, mostly for news and baseball games. One evening I was playing Beethoven's Symphony No. 9, Sarah's favorite, something I hadn't been able to listen to since she died. Samuel came up from the annex and sat transfixed. For the entire 65 minutes he didn't move, barely seemed to breathe. When it ended, he looked at me with such profound emotion that I understood. Music touched something deep in him, something beyond words. After that I collected classical music tapes, Mozart, Bach, Chopin. Samuel had favorites, Beethoven above all, but also Vivaldi's Four Seasons. On quiet evenings, we'd sit together, him in his corner, me in my chair, just listening. No words needed. Just music and companionship and the peace of understanding. He was incredibly gentle. His hands were massive, each finger thicker than my wrist, with strength that could crush bone without effort. But he'd use those hands to carefully groom my beard when it got too long, picking out twigs and debris with surprising delicacy. It was his gesture of affection, the way he showed he cared. One night in February 1992, I came down with influenza. Fever of 104, hallucinations, couldn't move from my bed. Samuel sat beside me for 4 days straight, keeping me warm with his body heat, bringing water, making soft, reassuring sounds. He saved my life that week. The nearest doctor was 40 miles away, and I would have died alone. But Samuel kept me alive. There were moments of levity, too. Samuel had a sense of humor, though it took me years to recognize it. He'd hide my tools in places I'd already searched, then watch me hunt for them with what I can only describe as amusement. When I finally found the hammer in the same spot I'd checked 3 times, I'd hear that soft rumbling sound that meant laughter. He was fascinated by my books, even though he couldn't read. I'd find him studying them, looking at illustrations, turning pages carefully. I started buying books with lots of pictures, encyclopedias, National Geographic magazines. He'd spend hours looking at images of the world beyond our forest. But there were hard moments, too. Samuel showed signs of frustration with confinement. He'd scratch at the walls, leaving claw marks in the wood. He'd stand at the small window I'd installed, covered with thick curtains, and stare at it for hours. I knew he missed the forest, missed freedom, missed his own kind. The guilt of keeping him confined, even to save his life, was crushing. We communicated about this through drawings. He drew himself in wide-open spaces running free. Then he drew hunters, guns, cages. Then he drew himself and me together, safe. He understood the trade-off, freedom versus survival, and he'd chosen survival, chosen me. But that didn't make the confinement less painful for either of us. The years blurred together. Samuel aged visibly, his reddish-brown fur slowly turning gray around the muzzle and chest. His movements became more deliberate, careful. The limp from his healed leg never fully disappeared. I aged too. My hair went white. My hands developed arthritis. My back complained every morning. We were growing old together, two solitary beings in a cabin in Montana, keeping each other alive. But everything changed in October 2017 when my past finally caught up with me. My brother's daughter, Rebecca Sullivan, showed up at my cabin unannounced on October 14, 2017. I hadn't seen her in over a decade. She'd been a teenager at Sarah's funeral. Now she was 42, a wildlife biologist working in Yellowstone. She'd gotten my address from the Forest Service, drove up the 4-mile access road in a Jeep, knocked on my door at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. "Uncle James," she said when I opened the door, looking shocked at how old I'd gotten. "Dad died last month. Heart attack. I thought you should know." My brother Tom, dead at 69. I'd cut ties with him too, years ago. The news hit harder than I expected. Rebecca saw it in my face, probably thought I was going to collapse. She helped me inside, made coffee, started talking about funeral arrangements I'd missed, family I hadn't seen in decades. And that's when Samuel made a sound from below. Rebecca froze mid-sentence, coffee cup halfway to her lips. "What was that?" "Old pipes," I said automatically. "Place is falling apart." But Samuel made the sound again, a low rumble that came from beneath the floor. Rebecca set down her coffee very slowly, her scientist's brain clearly working. She looked at the floor, at me, back at the floor. "Uncle James," she said carefully, "what's under your cabin?" I had seconds to decide. Tell her and risk everything. Lie and know she'd investigate. She was a biologist trained to recognize animal sounds, and Samuel had made it clear he was no ordinary animal. "Rebecca," I said, and heard my voice crack. "What I'm about to show you, you can never tell anyone. Ever. Do you understand? Not your mother, not colleagues, no one." She nodded slowly, probably thinking I had illegal pelts or was running drugs. She had no idea. I moved the bed aside, lifted the trapdoor and called down, "Samuel, it's okay. Come up slowly." Rebecca's face when Samuel emerged will stay with me forever. First disbelief, then terror. Then she scrambled backward and grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she tried to dial 911. I caught her wrist. "Please, just watch." Just for 2 minutes. Samuel stood in the doorway of the annex, all 8 feet of him, gray-streaked fur catching the lamplight. He looked at Rebecca with those intelligent eyes, then did something I'd never seen him do before. He knelt down, made himself smaller, non-threatening, and then he picked up a piece of charcoal and a stone slab I kept nearby and began to draw. What he drew were mathematical equations, complex ones, Pythagorean theorem, geometric proofs. Things he'd learned from my old college textbooks over the years, concepts he'd mastered through observation alone. Rebecca's mouth fell open. She looked from the equations to Samuel to me. Those are correct. The proofs are right. His name is Samuel," I said. "I found him with a broken leg in March 1988. I've been protecting him ever since." For the next 2 hours, Rebecca went through every emotion, fear, disbelief, anger at me for keeping this secret, awe at what Samuel represented, and finally, understanding. This wasn't just some undiscovered ape. This was intelligent life, possibly the last of its kind, and I'd spent 29 years keeping him safe. When she finally left just before midnight, she hugged me at the door. "I'll help you," she whispered. "I'll do whatever you need. But Uncle James, the world needs to know about him." Then when he's gone, I said. Not before, he's been through enough. She agreed, and she kept her word. Rebecca became crucial to our survival. As a wildlife biologist, she had access to medical supplies, research equipment, connections that helped explain away my unusual purchases. She visited monthly, bringing vitamins tailored for Samuel's physiology, antibiotics when he had infections, advanced materials that made his underground room more comfortable. She documented everything, too. Took photographs I'd refused to take, collected hair and skin samples, recorded vocalizations. When the time comes, she said, we'll need proof. Irrefutable proof. In 2019, another person joined our circle of trust through circumstance, not choice. Marcus Chen, an old Marine buddy from my first tour in Vietnam, showed up at the cabin in June with stage 3 colon cancer and 6 months to live. He wanted to see his old friend one last time, make peace before the end. I tried to turn him away. But Marcus was dying, and I remembered him carrying me through a firefight in '68 after I took shrapnel to the leg. I owed him honesty. When I showed him Samuel, Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. Brother, he said, I've seen some shit in my life, but this is something else. He looked at Samuel with a combat Marine's eye, assessing threat level, and apparently decided there was none. Nice to meet you, big guy. James always did collect strays. Marcus visited 3 more times before he died in November 2019. Each time, he'd sit with Samuel, tell war stories in that rough voice of his, teach Samuel card games using oversized cards we made. Samuel seemed to understand that Marcus was dying, was gentler with him than with anyone else, would carefully help him up when Marcus's strength failed. When Marcus died, I told Samuel. He drew a picture of Marcus with wings, rising up. Then he touched his heart. Then mine. He understood loss. He understood grief. And he was telling me Marcus was at peace. We were a strange family. An old veteran, a biologist, and a creature that wasn't supposed to exist. But for a few years, we had something precious. We had each other. Then February 2023 brought the crisis that nearly ended everything. Samuel started showing symptoms in January 2023. Headaches first. I could tell from the way he'd hold his head, make distressed sounds. Then his vision seemed affected. He'd misjudge distances, stumble. By early February, he was barely eating, spending 18 hours a day sleeping, and I knew it was serious. Rebecca came up on February 10th with a portable ultrasound machine. What she found made her go pale. There's a mass, she said, showing me the screen. Base of the skull, probably a tumor. It's large, James, and given the location... She didn't need to finish. We both knew what a brain tumor meant. Samuel was dying. For the next week, Samuel's condition deteriorated rapidly. He lost coordination, couldn't draw anymore, barely responded when I spoke to him. His breathing became labored. I sat with him constantly, holding his massive hand, telling him it would be okay, even though I knew it was a lie. On February 17th, during a severe electrical storm, Rebecca and I made a desperate decision. We'd perform surgery. She'd found a veterinary clinic 80 miles away that had closed down 6 months earlier, but still had functioning equipment. The owner owed her a favor. We'd sedate Samuel, transport him in my covered trailer, operate to remove as much of the tumor as we could. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was Samuel's only chance. We sedated him at 10 p.m., using tranquilizers Rebecca had calculated for his weight and physiology. Samuel understood what was happening. Before he went under, he touched my face, gentle, careful, then made the gesture for love. Then he closed his eyes and trusted us. Moving his unconscious body was brutal. 800 pounds of dead weight, loaded into a trailer covered with blankets. The storm raged around us, lightning splitting the sky, rain hammering down. I drove while Rebecca sat in back with Samuel, monitoring his vitals. We were 2 miles from the clinic when disaster struck. I saw the drone first, a commercial news drone, probably from Missoula, out getting storm footage. It hovered directly above us for maybe 3 seconds, its camera pointed down at the trailer. Through the open back, through a gap in the blankets, it would have filmed Samuel's unmistakable silhouette. "Rebecca," I shouted. "Drone, they got us on camera." She reacted instantly, pulled out a device from her pack, an electromagnetic pulse generator she'd brought for emergencies, aimed it up and hit the trigger. The drone sparked, wobbled, crashed into the trees, but the damage was done. The footage had been streaming live to the news station's servers. We didn't stop. Got Samuel to the clinic, Rebecca scrubbed in, and I assisted while she performed surgery that would have made headlines if anyone had known. She couldn't remove the whole tumor, it was too integrated with brain tissue, but she removed enough to relieve the pressure. Samuel survived. Against all odds, he survived. Meanwhile, Rebecca was on her laptop, hacking into the news station's servers, tracing the upload. The footage was there. 3 seconds of a large, humanoid shape in a covered trailer during a storm. She deleted it from the server, found backups, deleted those, checked every connected device. By 4 a.m., the footage was gone from every digital location she could find. But we never knew if someone had seen it before deletion, if some tech working late night had downloaded it, if it was sitting somewhere waiting to surface. For the next 3 months, we waited for the knock on the door that never came. Apparently, we'd been lucky. The footage was too brief, too unclear, easily dismissed as storm artifacts or sensor glitches. But that night changed something. Samuel knew how close we'd come to exposure, and his tumor, though reduced, was inoperable. Rebecca gave him maybe 2 years, 3 if we were lucky. Samuel began his final preparations. The last 18 months of Samuel's life were a gift I didn't deserve. The surgery bought him time. Not a cure, but time. Time for him to complete his life's work, which I only understood at the very end. He drew constantly during this period. When he was too weak to hold charcoal, Rebecca rigged up a device, a stylus attached to a glove that tracked his hand movements on a tablet. Samuel adapted to it quickly, his intelligence working around his failing body. The drawings he made during those final months weren't just pictures. They were a legacy, a warning, a gift to humanity that might not deserve it. He drew forests burning, not metaphorically. Samuel drew specific forest fires with dates that matched real wildfires. Paradise, California, 2018. Australia, 2019 to 2020. The Amazon, every year. He'd track news on Rebecca's tablet when she visited, correlating what he saw with what he understood. He drew rivers drying up. The Colorado River, the Yangtze, the Murray-Darling. Again, specific places, accurate details. He'd somehow learned geography, climate patterns, understood the planet's water systems better than most scientists. He drew extinction, species disappearing, populations collapsing. He drew the Baiji River dolphin, extinct, the western black rhino, extinct, the Pinta Island tortoise, extinct. Creatures Samuel's people had somehow known about, watched disappear, recorded their passing. But the drawings that haunted me most came in October 2024, just weeks before his death. Samuel drew a timeline. Past, present, future. In the past, he drew his people, many of them spread across forests worldwide. In the present, he drew emptiness. In the future, he drew something that made my blood cold, the same emptiness, but spreading to everything. Forests gone, oceans dead, the planet itself lifeless. He made me understand through gesture and expression that he was showing me 2 generations, 2 human generations before ecological collapse became irreversible. This wasn't just the observation of one creature. This was accumulated knowledge from a species that had watched humanity for millennia, that understood natural systems better than we ever would, that saw patterns we were too arrogant to notice. Samuel was giving us a final warning. By summer 2024, Samuel was declining rapidly. He'd lost maybe 200 pounds. His fur, once thick and lustrous, became thin and patchy. He slept 20 hours a day. When he was awake, he drew or sat with me, his massive hand resting on mine. Rebecca visited weekly now, monitoring his vital signs, managing his pain. She'd taken a leave of absence from work, told her supervisors it was to care for a dying family member, Not technically a lie. On November 3rd, 2024, Samuel became too weak to draw. He lay in his bed in the underground room, breathing shallow, eyes half closed. I sat beside him, held his hand, talked about nothing and everything. "You changed my life, you know that?" I told him. "I was dead inside when I found you, just going through motions. You gave me purpose. You gave me family. You saved me, Samuel." He squeezed my hand weakly, made a sound, soft and low. Then he did something I'll never forget. He opened his mouth and forced sounds that almost formed words. His vocal anatomy couldn't produce human speech, but after 36 years together, he tried. Just once. For me. J. James. He was trying to say my name. Tears poured down my face. "I'm here, buddy, I'm right here." Samuel managed one more gesture. Hand to his chest, hand to mine. Then he touched his forehead, where we'd learned meant always or forever. Love, family, forever. He died at 3:47 a.m. on November 4th, 2024, 36 years, 7 months, and 27 days after I first found him broken and bleeding in that Wyoming ravine. He slipped away peacefully, his breathing simply stopping like an engine finally running out of fuel. I sat with him until dawn, holding his hand as it grew cold, memorizing his face, thanking him for every day we'd had together. Rebecca arrived at 6 a.m. I'd called her the night before when I knew it was close. She cried, this tough scientist who'd seen death in the wild 100 times. Samuel had been family to her too. Together, following instructions Samuel had drawn months earlier, we prepared his body. No dissection, no preservation. Samuel had been clear. He wanted to return to the earth, to the forests he'd been denied in life. We cremated him in a pyre I'd built specifically for this purpose, using wood Samuel had selected himself over the past year. Sacred wood, Rebecca called it. Cedar, juniper, pine from trees that had special meaning. The cremation took 8 hours. When it was done, we mixed his ashes with seeds from 37 different pine trees, one for each year we'd been together. Then, over the next 3 weeks, Rebecca and I traveled. Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. We planted those 37 pine trees across 3 states, in remote locations that matched places Samuel had drawn. Each site was somewhere his people had once lived, according to the maps he'd created. We planted his children, his legacy, seeds that would grow into trees that would live 300 years or more. In a way, Samuel would outlive us all. I'm sitting here now, 3 weeks after Samuel's death, in this small apartment in Kalispell that doesn't feel like home. The doctors gave me 6 months. Stage 4 lung cancer, inoperable. The pain is manageable with morphine, but I can feel my body shutting down piece by piece. I'm 83 years old, and I'm ready, more than ready. On my table sits that metal box. Inside are 1,847 drawings Samuel made over 36 years. Photographs Rebecca took during the last 7 years. Proof that will change everything when released. DNA samples that will rewrite textbooks. Video of Samuel solving puzzles, creating art, demonstrating intelligence that rivals or exceeds human cognitive capability. I've spent 3 weeks writing this account, my hands shaking from medication and grief. Rebecca has digital copies of everything, stored in multiple secure locations with instructions for release after my death. She's found 3 sympathetic scientists who've agreed to analyze the DNA confidentially, publish findings under their own names if necessary. The world will know. When I'm gone and can't be prosecuted for what I did, when Samuel can't be threatened, when the truth is contained and can't be suppressed, the world will know. But I'm not telling this story to prove Bigfoot exists. That's the least important part. I'm telling it because Samuel's final warning deserves to be heard. We are destroying ourselves. Not might be, not could be. We are. Samuel's people watched human civilization rise and expand, watched us cut down forests that took millennia to grow, watched us poison rivers that had run clean since the Ice Age, watched us drive species after species into extinction. They watched their own kind dwindle from thousands to hundreds to dozens to, As far as I know, one. Samuel was probably the last. The very last of a people who'd survived on this planet for tens of thousands of years, living in balance with nature while humanity conquered and consumed. And he died not from natural causes, but from a tumor likely caused by environmental toxins that have saturated even the remotest wilderness. His drawings showed the pattern: 2 generations, maybe 50 years. Then ecological collapse becomes irreversible. Climate systems fail, food chains break, mass extinction becomes unstoppable. He knew. His people knew. They'd watched it happen before on smaller scales. Civilizations that cut down all their forests, empires that poisoned their rivers, societies that killed off their megafauna and then starved. Samuel's people remembered, because they'd been there, watching, surviving in the margins while humans made the same mistakes again and again. But this time is different. This time there's nowhere to retreat to. This time we're doing it to the whole planet at once. That's what Samuel was trying to tell me. That's what those final drawings meant. He was giving humanity one last warning from a species that understood long-term consequences better than we ever would. Maybe it's too late. Maybe the collapse is already inevitable, but Samuel believed there was still a chance. Or he wouldn't have asked me to reveal the truth. He wouldn't have given me 36 years of companionship and trust and love if he thought there was no hope. I've spent 37 years protecting a secret. Now I'm spending my last few months revealing it. Not for fame. I'll be dead before this account becomes public. Not for vindication. I don't need anyone to believe me. But because I made a promise to the being who taught me what it means to be truly human. If there are others like Samuel still out there, hiding in the deep places, they deserve protection. They deserve acknowledgement. They deserve the chance to survive. And we deserve to know what we're destroying in our arrogance and greed. Samuel showed me that intelligence takes many forms, that family transcends species, that the greatest wisdom sometimes comes from those we dismiss as primitive or impossible, that the real monsters aren't hiding in the forest, they're the ones cutting it down. Would I do it all again, knowing how it would end? In a heartbeat. Those 37 years with Samuel were the most meaningful of my life, more than my military service, more than my marriage, as much as I loved Sarah, because Samuel taught me something essential. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it. And when we destroy it, we destroy ourselves. I'm looking at one of Samuel's final drawings now. It shows a pine tree, grown tall and strong. Inside the trunk, if you look carefully, there's a face. Samuel's face, smiling. He's in those trees we planted. He's in the forests he tried to save. He's in the earth that gave him life and will nurture his seeds. He's not gone. Not really. He's just changed form. The same will be true for all of us, eventually. The question is whether we leave behind forests full of life or a barren planet that can't sustain anything. Samuel trusted me with that question. I'm trusting you with it now. In 2 months, maybe 3, I'll be gone. Rebecca will release this account along with all the evidence. The world will react however it reacts. Belief, denial, investigation, debate. It doesn't matter. What matters is the message Samuel gave his life to deliver. Change or die. Those are our options. There is no third choice. I met something extraordinary in a Wyoming ravine 37 years ago. Something that shouldn't have existed but did. Something that showed me truths I didn't want to see. I spent 37 years protecting him from humanity. Now I'm spending my last days protecting humanity from itself, delivering a warning from a friend who saw the future clearly because his people had learned to read the patterns we ignore. Listen to what Samuel tried to say. Please, before it's too late for all of us. I'm 83 years old. I'm dying. I hid a Bigfoot for 37 years, and the biggest secret isn't that he existed. It's what he tried to tell us before he died. This is James Robert Sullivan, signing off. Samuel, brother, I hope I did right by you. I hope your warning reaches someone who can make a difference. I hope those 37 pine trees grow tall and strong, living proof that love and protection matter more than fame or fortune. See you on the other side, old friend. Save me a place in whatever forest comes next. And to everyone reading this, keep your eyes open. Question what you think you know. Protect what cannot protect itself. And maybe, just maybe, if others like Samuel are still out there watching, prove to them that humanity is capable of change. Prove that we deserve to share this world with beings whose wisdom exceeds our own. Prove that Samuel's trust in me wasn't misplaced. That's all any of us can do. That's all Samuel ever asked. Remember him, remember his warning, and do better than we've done so far. Because 2 generations isn't very long. And the trees we plant today might be the only ones our grandchildren ever see.